I'm reminded that we are in Asia, because this is much more important in Asia than it is in Africa. Yeah, it's sort of a, I do notice it, that I don't recognize it. It is more important than Asia. I really is a common practice everywhere, more so here. I write it to them myself. It's embarrassing. And I'm sure there's a way to train to do it. I just haven't made it so your work is
Okay. When looking at it, we moved a few cards because they were very similar in topics. Here we have indicator development, and here we have indicators. Oh, there are some green dots coming this way.
Okay.
No?
It's fine.
So a lot on indicator development and indicators. And M&E frameworks related to climate change, methodology for measuring resilience, methodology for complex systems evaluation, and this one was also environment and social safeguards M&E. So quite a lot of M&E systems design and frameworks, and quite a bit here on indicators. Then here we have one on integration. And then looking at the other board, there was only one person putting on balancing learning and accountability, but that card got a lot of interest with a lot of dots around it. So there are more people who actually see that perhaps not as a primary need, but as a secondary need. The big unknown here. I know who put it there. And
That's all the unknown evidence.
planning M&E design and the planning of M&E design and mainstreaming into other sectors. And I think here it is with respect to organizational knowledge management, and we had one that was more or less the same here as well with respect to capacity development on how to mainstream into other relevant sectors. Given the discussion at your tables, does anyone want to feed back some information given what you see here? Anyone?
I guess maybe it's a supplementary question.
No, sorry, I'll stop yelling then. It's a supplementary question on the issue of frameworks.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious whether people in the room who are working on, let's say, climate change adaptation, M&E, are developing frameworks where targets are scenario-based. Since we really don't know how climate change is affecting, or there are numerous trajectories that it could take, so are people using scenarios that way?
Anyone?
Using scenarios for M&E or for planning?
Alternative pathways is there.
I guess what I'm thinking is, if people are trying to include assessments of adaptive capacity in their results frameworks, how can you know, one, that's a hard thing to measure. It's a hard thing to conceptualize all the pieces of that in order to figure out what you would measure. But how could you even say that adaptive capacity is sufficient, given that we don't even know how climate change is going to be affecting different communities? So would you be doing, I'm just curious whether anybody is doing that on scenario-based assumptions on if climate change affects this area in such and such a way, this type of adaptive capacity or this range of adaptive capacity would be sufficient or not. It's just, it's part of the, how do you handle complexity in this, and I'm just curious if people are using that.
Just in response to that, we're not doing sort of scenario planning for M&A per se, but what we have are sort of decision tools to ensure that despite uncertainties, you can arrive at the robust decision making. So that's because we sort of understood that it's really hard to have a very precise frameworks and measurements, given that even the science itself is still evolving. So what you can do to help decision makers is actually to ensure robust decision making. So we have tools for robust decision making.
Yeah. In IDRC, we are initiating a new program on climate change adaptation research in Africa and Asia, South Asia. And we have initiated the program, small studies on developing the scenarios of climate change in 3 different ecosystems. This is one which is, the results are not yet out, but I know personally a couple of studies from India, particularly in the semi-arid regions, and they are looking at what are the scenarios from now to 20 years, given that scenario 1, there is no mitigation or nothing is happening. This as usual scenario, and then if the carbon dioxide is reduced by so much percentage, etc. So these scenarios are built, and based on that, the projections are made, not so much in terms of what should be the adaptive capacity, because that is by far it's extremely difficult at the moment, even for science to understand. We have several scenarios like if the temperature raises, to some extent it increases. Initially it enhances productivity, but later it reduces. To what extent, in which area, how much impact is by and large not known even by science. So that is tough.
So I work with monitoring evaluation with community-based adaptation. So looking at it that way, to answer your question, is that we're starting to bring communities together with more kind of scientific climate organisations and bringing the stakeholders together to kind of create a new climate change knowledge that we need. So it's looking, using our communities, because obviously we'll tell us historical data and the kind of context of vulnerability up until their perception of what they understand it right now. And also we're trying to capacity build the institutions, so we have no downscaled information that's needed, so it's trying to capacity build to do that and bring the stakeholders that are needed together to create new knowledge that might be needed. So looking in that way and how you can then plan long term with that.
I'm working for a certain project in Indonesia, and we also consider this scenario-based for in terms of vulnerability assessment. So after that, we can continue to have the city resilience strategy to prioritize actions for adaptation. Well, I think there's several methods that also considers the scenario. Although I'm not saying that our methods to vulnerability assessment is a very easy one. I'm actually thinking it's a bit hard, but we're still trying to develop the best way to make it easier or user-friendly for the government if they want to apply it to another cities.
Okay.
I definitely can share it if that will be helpful.
I wanted to leave it at that because the scenario planning discussion is one that's a little bit separate from the knowledge needs discussion. It's an interesting one, for sure. Yeah? Well,
so I think a number of people talked about the balance with learning and accountability as an evaluator, and or even as just not an evaluator, but somebody working either inside or out of an organization, trying to have the organizations or the communities we're working with learn in addition to being accountable to certain goals or plans or progress. And I know that I've been thinking about that for some time now and have been learning mostly from evaluators doing totally different work, mostly social sector work, and from more of the innovative, newer approaches to evaluation, including Landlope and Patton's work. And it's a real tension that's probably inherent to trying to use evaluation as a tool for learning and organizational learning and adaptation. But I am aware of a number of articles and some work coming out, mostly out of the United States, that's available on the internet. And I have, actually on my computer, a list of resources. Happy to share that. And it's a very active discussion in the field. So I'd be happy, people debate this and talk about it a lot. I'd be happy to talk more.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting, and it's also good for us to know, as Sea Change, to know what are the knowledge needs. And to us, after 2 years, it's not all that incredibly surprising, the dots that we see here, because it's an ongoing discussion. If you talk with climate change M&E people, then a number of issues are generally always coming up, and the M&E frameworks, designs and principles for climate change programs, it is one that quite often pops up, and whether or not it should be very specific frameworks, or whether or not standard resilience indicators can be used, our debates are there as well, and that depends really a lot on the context as well, which side of the two you will sway in that debate. Indicators is always a question, and we personally thought at some point whether or not it's useful to have an indicator database. Anyone having any feeling about that? I don't know how it would look like. It could be that you select, okay, national level or local level, and that you select livelihoods, or that you select a certain type of program, but it would be very rough. It wouldn't be incredibly specific indicators, because there are so many out there that you can't create a database with thousands of indicators.
We actually tried doing that, actually, and we did get very good results. I mean, in India, sharing with some of the friends here, we were trying to design an M&E system for water and sanitation sector on a sector-wide approach for the whole country. And as I was saying earlier, in a country which is, in terms of institutional arrangements, in terms of capacities, in terms of diversity, as diverse as India, and water, of course, is a state subject. So we couldn't, we were struggling. Our dream world was we could come up with 4 indicators which capture and across India, across all states, and we couldn't. Yeah. So what we did was we said, okay, fine, we devised certain categories, sustainability, blah, 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 I mean 4 big categories, and said all the states, you can shove in whatever indicator that you want in relevant. So we developed a basket of indicators. And then through a series of national consultation workshops, then we were able to drill down to, even then, what we thought was much more, but even then I think was 22 indicators out of 180. We began with 180. So, yeah. But we found it extremely useful.
But for other projects or programs, it might be interesting to see what were the 158 that were not chosen. Yeah. Because you didn't choose them because of your specific situation, but they could be the choice for another situation.
We did pretty much what we did here, literally. Yeah. I mean, all in many ways, it's very, we say, okay, who's the maximum number of takers for these indicators?
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to leave it at that because today I'm actually my own timekeeper, and I have a good 20 to 25 minutes left, depending how far I want to run into the tea time. And after that, in the questionnaire that we did, we asked, okay, you have knowledge needs, but are those needs really gaps, or is there knowledge out there? Can you satisfy that need quite easily? And on the question, do you have specific knowledge gaps? 81% said yes, and 85% said yes on knowledge needs, which means that only 4% difference are the people who could satisfy their knowledge needs with existing readily available knowledge, or at least that's what I would read in such an answer. And then the question was, to what extent do you agree or strongly agree? Because yesterday we made a small error in our presentation we did in the evening, and that was that we only looked at agree, but people who strongly agree also agree, so we should have added those as well. With the following statement: knowledge gaps arise from a lack of time to search for knowledge materials. That's close to 74% of the people say, yeah, it's a lack of time. And I have to say, in all of these categories, there were very little people who disagreed with any of them. Most of them were neutral, and then didn't make the agree or strongly agree categories. A lack of access to knowledge specialists, a lack of free access to knowledge materials, and I'm guessing that a lack of access to knowledge specialists, that should possibly also be a lack of free access to knowledge specialists, an actual lack of knowledge materials, or the inability to find any knowledge materials. Having said that, I wanted to ask you, is there a need to separate knowledge needs from knowledge gaps? And I asked that in the mindset from the community of practice, which is that we want to look at knowledge dissemination opposed to knowledge generation. And a knowledge need that can be readily satisfied with information out there, all boils down to the dissemination of knowledge, while a knowledge gap boils down to generating new knowledge. So I was wondering what you think about making the distinction between a knowledge need and a knowledge gap. Anyone?
It is essential to differentiate between knowledge needs. I mean, you rightly said, the answer is in your own statement that knowledge needs are where you really have to generate. So that it has to be communicated to specific practitioners like researchers, I don't know, whatever. But if there is knowledge access, or what did you say, knowledge need? Knowledge gap need to be addressed by people who are competent enough in that. But knowledge sharing is through communication, effective communication, and maybe putting it in accessible forums and other things. So we need to differentiate between the two so that we can it can be addressed by different people. And again, the need to know a specific knowledge comes from various sectors. It could be purely scientific, it could be implementation where you really don't know how to pick up a value. For example, we're talking about economic valuation of some of these adaptations, which is not available easy. Even if it is available, it's not. It cannot be translated easily. That's another problem.
Okay. Sanjay?
I think from a conceptual point of view, you can make the distinction between the knowledge need and knowledge gap. But I think in practice, if knowledge was ubiquitous, if I knew everything, only then could I be able to make a distinction between what is there and what is not there. If I do not have something, I do not know whether anybody else has it. So from a practical standpoint of view, I think it's you need to be very knowledgeable to be able to make the distinction between a knowledge gap and a knowledge need.
It's maybe more of a distinction for us as knowledge brokers, managing knowledge as a community of practice, because we see the answers coming and we can search more widely to find, we see the questions and we can search for the answers. So for us it's more of a question internally, and
Tim, I don't know what you were going to say, but no, I don't know. I know we do read each other's minds, but I think there's also not going to be an answer or knowledge with a capital K in a lot of these cases, because there may be a framework, for example, but that may not be the strongest framework. It may not work in your context. So this is going to be an evolving field that hopefully will become more knowledgeable and wiser over time and have more tools. But I don't see any end point to this. I think this will be going on for, so that's the thing about meeting the needs. To me, that's almost like, I may be able to share a framework I've come up with, but I can't even convince my client to use it. So is it really that good? I think it's good, but that there are issues like that I think that we need to have a kind of continuous dialogue around.
Just one thing that I found useful to think about as giving some thought to the session before coming, and given what you mentioned about explosive growth and the number of people it seems like if you think about knowledge needs on the demand side, and then we've got very experienced people who are aware of a lot of the resources out there, but we also have new practitioners coming into the field. And so there's a whole range of valid needs, and some of them, and if you think about the supply side of information to meet those needs, there's some that can be filled with existing information. We can think about ways to package that information in more accessible ways. But then there's also the gaps, areas where there's needs out there in the community on the demand side that we don't have the supply of information to provide, where you might want a very active research agenda, involving the community practice to develop and forge methods and approaches and information.
Thank you. Last one, short one.
Yeah, I was just saying that actually, just the same point that you were saying. In fact, it depends on the perspectives. If it's a knowledge practitioners and knowledge users, for him or for her, the knowledge needs are different than somebody who's a resource center or say some experts. But then it may be a knowledge gap only. So it all depends on the perspectives. It's very related actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Given the pressure and time, I want to do one small group conversation, but we're not going to put it on the boards anymore. It's nice if you can put it on cue cards, because we will collect the cue cards and use them, and we will actually use a different color to make sure that we have a different topic. And that has to do with what are your preferred knowledge products. So you said I have specific knowledge needs. These are the knowledge needs, and then the question is very open. What are your preferred knowledge products? And if you think of a knowledge product, you can both think of either a format or you can think of a medium. So that can be, if you talk about a medium, it can be e-learning, or it can be one-on-one conversations, or it can be face-to-face, or it can be conferences. Where do you learn the best? Looking at it that way with respect to knowledge products. If you look at format, then it can be a guidance note, or more a step-by-step approach, or you really like to have more conceptual things, or more frameworks. So just very broadly, how do you feel about it? And have a bit of a discussion in your group on knowledge products for the next 10 minutes. Then we'll collect the cards and we pick some of the answers out of it.
Results is like online forum discussion threads, for example, where you can put on the table and get a variety of perspectives. That's one I underline. For example, that article we published the book that gave perspectives on that. So that's something that could help in the controversial areas to see where
You precede those issues.
Right.
Put them up there. Information on scenarios.
I can really use parts of them are all
green paper or something like that.
Yeah, I have one as a souvenir.
Perhaps have reference information for various frameworks that have either resilience context or mitigation context. Many of those you probably want to update them
We support a network called Change M&E Network, which looks at it's a platform for CG, which aims to share information through adult college, ways to get it. These are very things which are creating a collaboration in the IT world. We want to set up your health systems, one versus the others. What seems to be one of the learning methodologies has been very useful for, especially for the IT track. In a way, it's like coming up with a as indicators for the IT systems. What we wanted to do was to bring people from different countries who specialize in designing indicators and work together jointly to develop a product. And that was easy to apply in other countries depending on their context. But the whole architecture is sort of all created in a way. So it's a high level of sharing ownership of the product. So it might be, if we talk about frameworks, instead of having one very small group of people working on it, it has to be code developer. I'm not getting there, but yeah. But it has been actually utilized now.
I put down matrix. So, for example, newcomers in climate change, ethnic circles, peer coaching, one country will be able to come well how the other projects done. Self-learning. Idea is that 7 countries get the eligibility straight within the next 60 days. And then the remaining participants, 13 countries going to visit one country first, and then you get 3 countries talking about one existing framework and learning and improving the existing framework. And so possibly, that's a way forward rather than somebody inventing, scientists inventing, isolated groups. Lots of things happening. I don't think they're satisfied with these frameworks. It helps, but it's not often not directly applicable. It takes too much time to catch up with the academics and I am a person who says no, like very tight. This climate adaptation can be so abstract. So people spend years talking around in circles, and actually nobody risks in defining anything. So I think you have to get started. You find your indicator, even if it's not a big, you start off with that one. And as you try and capture whatever you think is what you will capture, you go ahead and capture. And if what you capture doesn't really satisfy your information need, you have a workshop and everybody knows is doing how you exactly capture the capture. So, but by like what I observe so much in international areas, go round in circles and round in circles, and the discussion goes to just sky and back. And it gives everybody an excuse to not start this because it's so complicated. And it's actually not. You have to just get started. So that's the sort of approach I take. So like when I work with people, usually I say, whatever, this amount of time and come up with what you can do best, all the capacity and knowledge you have. And then you do some sort of cross-fertilization and some other things of people. After some sort of process, we go what second best we have. But we don't have any data. So
we also start with different
yeah.
Start with those. That's we can tell you a lot already what has happened in the last 50 years. Research in some cases. What are those issues? Are they cyclic things? Or is there something that's more fundamental?
So actually I think it's good to learn by doing and not stop doing because it's so complex. And this is what I've observed now. Yes, it's complex. But some stuff is only complicated and multifaceted. And then it's
where you can post a question and you would guarantee the answer within 7 days or 6 days. While Julian's are good, but the trouble is that you often post propose something and then you rely on the generosity of somebody who can spare the time to answer. So you're not guaranteed. So, which as a professional body, you can't get paid for this professional body.
However, sports did.
There's a commitment to response. Yeah, somebody is responsible to answer.
And they would just, they had to spend it. No, anything, you were in, you were in that country and you were going to idea of solar, complex solar systems for water purification. And you didn't even know that they were, for example, you wanted to know have they worked somewhere, which are the main providers. I thought it was lots of things.
And I was on the supplier side, so it was tough for us. I thought it was like...
But was he working in James? But it's similar to something, like for example, I signed up to a Nani network, a Nani B2B network, and he said, okay, sign up, and the Nani perspective want to hire. So, there could be something similar on the climate change. Per year you pay this, everybody pays their fee, and per year you can get up to 3 questions of up to so many results per hour. And then actually somebody will be copying the results, then you have a closer of issues that were asked. So
the next time the first thing that you search the portal and see similar question.
So if it works for the Nani network on a market basis, because I pay my $50, I'm having to send reference check. So other people may as well not use it, but those people get high quality reference or high quality.
It's a switch today, so it's
I'd like to ask you to take a minute to wrap up the cards. Can I ask the facilitators to collect the cards that are already filled out?
I would love to answer.
You're done? Okay, thank you. Sanjay, you want to ask?
I have got time with this very down. My next. Yes?
Okay. Thank you. I know that this 1.5-hour session is just too short to discuss this, and that's actually the case with most of these panel sessions, that 1.5 hours just doesn't capture it completely. I would love to have for this session 3 hours and have much more group work and feedback and come to, at this point already, real conclusions that we can use to move the community of practice forward. But what we will do is that we will make use of all this information, and we will also ask in a few weeks from now all the members to reflect on these findings once we have taken it all together. and then from there move our strategy forwards and see how members can be part in that. I'm going to take a few of the cards here as what are the most preferred knowledge products, and I had a good discussion there, and that is that in the end, Sea Change as a community of practice, it's online, but being here as offline, you get a lot out of it. And next to that, there's a group of people who doesn't make it here and who doesn't make it online because they just don't have computers. And they're in the field and they would actually love to have this information. And what I'm doing in Cambodia, and I know it also happens, or it has happened in Indonesia, is that I do informal M&E and climate change meets with people from community-based organizations and civil society organizations. And we just talk about it and explain the information we have, and we do it offline. So that's something that Sea Change members who would be interested in doing that in their country can contact me as well. And I can help them set that up, because we did that in 2 countries now. And I see that there's a lot of interest from grassroots level to get that information. And I have to say from a personal experience that it's very fulfilling to do it as well, to set up such meetings and discuss it with people. So I would strongly advise you, if you want to do that in your city, town, your university, discuss about it. We're happy to support it in some way or the other. Getting back to our knowledge products, case studies, mentoring, wow, help desk. Sea Change as a help desk with 2 times a week, 2-hour online climate change M&E doctor. It could be an idea, I like it. Subscription-based help desk. Yeah, I don't like the subscription part in this one, but I do like the help desk part. Well, subscription-based, if you're a Sea Change member, then you are subscribed in a sense. So, yeah, if that's what you meant, then yes. If you mean help desk, pay and go, then I say no, because it's a community of practice, and it's not a paid service provider as such. It might be that at some point in the far, far away future, it might become 2 entities, because we get a lot of requests for trainings as well, which right now we say to it, I'm very sorry, we can't do it. We can come online for free and talk for an hour distance, but we can't develop a training for you, because that's just not who we are. Interactive online platform and webinars. Volunteer specialists who can be accessed. That is already a little bit the case. I think only the level of access between members and seeing how we can facilitate that process to have it easier to find certain members is something that we need to work on as well. But having said that, you would then only find the online Sea Change members. You wouldn't find the second node of network that Sea Change members have. So it would be interesting to think about how can you access friends and colleagues of members who are outside of that network, and some of whom will not have access. Books, manuals, guidelines, case studies, thematic discussions, forum. I really like forums, but the problem is it's really hard to get people talking on a forum. It's like dragging a half a live cow through a very small hallway. And it's really hard. I tried it so hard, and it's really hard to get people talking on a forum. If there are topics, someone said as well in the survey, we put forward very extreme points. We don't necessarily agree with them, but we then get discussion around it. What we're doing right now is that we're developing a blog environment that has the option of commenting and having a discussion forum linked to the blog. And we are happy to be extreme there, so we will see what that will do. We'll probably develop some more people who don't like us. Technology transfer, who said that one? Technology transfer, I'm interested in that one. Yes? There's a microphone coming your way.
Yes, technology transfer is important tools for developing country like Nepal, because We don't have so much of fun to carry out, develop the such plans. Once you develop the project, you implement it and you find such result. And if it is good, and it should be transferred to other countries, other people, community.
Yeah.
That's
good idea. Field learning exchange. That's again, I think, the online-offline point. Personal training. Yeah, we're not going to do that anytime soon. Sorry, we'll put that on there. But we're happy to do a specific webinar or a meeting of half an hour or an hour with you, and have a group in a class, and then have a one-on-one discussion from a distance. That's something we can do.
If Change can't do the training, then maybe you could look at your members and point people in the direction of your members that could do it for you instead.
Yeah, we are thinking about that as well, to more or less have what some others have as well, like a database that people can, with their membership, also subscribe to, as being, if you need a training, yes, on a voluntary basis, paid, cost recovery, that you select that, and that you then find people who are relevant to you. That's something we can look into. Case studies, reviews, opportunities for dialogue, online and offline, debates on conceptual issues, knowledge mapping, communication, intensive training and workshops, conversations. I'd like you to talk on the forum. Bring forward topics. If the blog is online, feel free to contact me and say, I really have something controversial and I want to bring it out. Let me know, because we want you on there then. Online publications, guidelines, practice, and M&E frameworks, and more case studies. And I think I'm around now because I tried to get, again, the case study that I had first. Really thank you for this, because we will take this into account. Let's have a short look what they said in the survey. They said frameworks, handbooks, manuals, e-learning materials, good practices, case studies, webinars. There are some really interesting, fresh, new ideas here that I'll take along as well. And I have to say there were some very interesting, fresh ideas here as well that are below the 8.3%, but that we still take into account because they're really interesting. What we will do is that this will be synthesized in a document, and not just a document, we will do something with it as well. We will feed it back to you and to the whole community of practice for feedback on it, and with that we will develop our knowledge generation plan. And everyone who wants to be involved, and that is very welcome to contact me. We got to the end of the session now. If there are one or two more questions, I'm happy to take them, but then we really have to wrap it up. Anyone? I would then like to thank you for your time. And with this is the last panel session of Sea Change. Thank you for your participation in the other two as well. It was a really nice experience with this big group of members, and also perhaps future members joining us. If you want to talk with me about M&E Knowledge Needs, feel free to approach me. I'm here the rest of the day tomorrow. Thank you very much.